I'm going to call our study session to order tonight for Shelton City Council for April 2nd. Oh, Mike's on. Thank you. Remember?
Mike.
We'll open with the Pledge of Allegiance. The Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have one item on our study agenda, so I'll turn it over to City Manager Jeff Knight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the public. Tonight, for the study session, back in January, we had talked a little bit about the master fee schedule and how we wanted to go through the master fee schedule piece by piece and hold work sessions with the council and then bring it back as part of a public hearing once council was comfortable with the direction and the reasoning behind how the fee schedule is designed and what its purpose is. So we've broken the fee schedule up into three parts. The first part is the part we're going to talk about tonight is the miscellaneous fees. The second part will be public works and engineering fees, which we'll have a study session on that April 16th, I believe. And then the third part will be planning and building fees, which is scheduled for May 7th. So tonight with the miscellaneous fees, there are, these are things for charges like copying fees, cost for the annual report. There's several deletions in here, and I'll go through a couple of the items. And then I'll have Chief Moody and Director Ziegler go through their items that are part of this miscellaneous packet. As you'll see on the first page, we have a couple of proposed changes. One of the deletions that we're making to the fee schedule is for the parking lot fees over here in the city lot. There's 5 or 6, I believe, reserved parking spots for different community organizations. But recovery of those fees has been spotty, and at this point, we don't think that it's necessary to collect those fees. It costs more in processing of those fees and getting them into the system, making sure that the fees are paid than it does recovery of the charges. And we can look at this again if and when, when we get that parking lot paved over there. It'll be nicer with more amenities. And then we can look at reserving spots for various organizations nearby and potentially other government organizations that would be able to use that. So if you flip to the second.
Can I ask a quick question on these things?
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I used to rent a parking space a long time ago from the thing, and it was kind of my understanding that a lot of people that work downtown, you know, that a lot of people that work in a lot of the businesses, that they had available, they could do that. I certainly thought it was more than 4 or 5 or 6 people that took advantage of that. Is that what you're talking about? How many, so you only rent out 4 or 5, and those are probably the people that work in the buildings or something, at the banks or whatever?
Close by, and it may have been a lot more in previous years, but once a lot of the parallel parking along Railroad and other spots had been provided, the usage has gone down substantially.
Yeah, we're no longer giving tickets for people to park out on the thing, and so.
Yeah, that's.
Well, no, I mean, we do if it arose or something, you know, but I mean, it's, generally, it's not a real enforceable. Right. You know, type of a situation. So, did you say after it was all paved, though, we may, and if there was more of a need to it, because as, just on my other hat, I am a business owner downtown, and it would be real nice if all the employees of all the businesses in front of my shop had something like over here to park.
Absolutely, and we can relook at that when that parking lot is paved and we have spaces available to rent. We'll need to look at the usage and how many city employees are using that lot, and if and when it fills up on the weekends for the church across the street.
Okay, thank you.
just a question. How does this apply to Evergreen Square? Because that is a city-owned parking lot.
Yeah, at that point, we don't rent spaces over at Evergreen Square as far as I know, as far as I've been able to determine. I think if and when we reinstitute a fee for the parking lot here across the street, it would be specific to this lot and not the lots fronting the businesses or other parking lots that we may own.
There's a deed restriction on
Yeah.
the Evergreen Square that's in
Right.
place that doesn't allow the city to rent out those stalls in that parking lot at this point. So they're free and open to the public.
Makes it pretty darn specific.
That's right.
So thanks.
So if you go to the second page here, there are no proposed changes. We're keeping the special event permits, permit fee the same as they were previously. All the other fees, map reproductions, and things like that, adoption fees from the animal shelter, those types of things, there are no changes whatsoever. And those fees are set to cover the costs of overhead. The other thing we wanted to do, which you'll see in a couple other spaces, particularly when we get to the planning and building portion of the master fee schedule discussion, is we wanted to make them even dollar amounts so that they're easy to calculate, easy for everybody to understand, and more streamlined. Rather than calculating out everything to the penny, we'll just make them even fees.
Jeff, I'm gonna bring this up. It's not related to what's in the schedule. The first page, the Visa MasterCard chargeback fee.
Yes.
We've had, I think it was before you came, discussions about being able to use credit cards to pay different bills or even permits, large items.
Yes.
And I know the discussion has always been, is it worth it? Because you're getting payment, but you're also paying something. I just want to bring that up to make sure that maybe Terry is still looking at that to understand that certain areas it might make sense and certain areas it may make sense to, add a charge for use of a card.
Yeah, and we are looking at that as part of an overall program for permit development or efficient permit development, where paying online and things like that, either with a debit card or with a credit card, is something that ought to be available to the citizens. If there is a convenience fee with that, it's usually a percentage, and just to cover the cost of the transaction. So I think it's 2.5% or something like that. Yeah, so we will definitely include that when we start using credit cards and online abilities more often, more robustly than we do now. Let's see, on the third page here, these are Director Ziegler's fees, and if he could go over those, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. There's a code enforcement fee that's in conjunction with the police department, and there really isn't much history with charging that fee. Typically, there would be a citation or a fine involved in that, and that's the enforcement piece of it. I think Chief Moody might be able to describe that a little more succinctly at this point, but we haven't, in my involvement with code enforcement, we weren't charging that fee. It would come through a fine or a citation, and that our investigation or whatnot, if it's egregious, if it's an abatement or something like that, then we're charging staff time to abate the structure and perform those duties. But the actual fee for the site visit and investigation, we haven't charged in the past, so we're proposing deletion of that.
I don't see that on this page.
Pardon me?
Where is that on the
Code
page?
enforcement, page 3, it's line 98.
It says delete the fee.
Oh, yours aren't numbered. It would be that one right there. It says code enforcement fee.
Well, it's not in red, so.
Yeah.
Oh, man, sorry about that. The other fees here for the meeting space and coffee service and things like that are just simply to cover the cost of overhead.
Excuse me, I jumped ahead. Yeah, exactly. So those are Civic Center rental fees for the rooms outside of this room, the main room, banquet room, the 3 meeting rooms, coffee service, kitchen, those. We discussed that in our budget preparation meetings late last year. I presented some scenarios that would, if we maintained the usage that we've seen over the last several years, what kind of fees would essentially equate to a cost recovery to provide these services for staff and materials. So that's what these rates would include. And then we would eliminate the the alcohol event fee of $100 because we have eliminated that from our policy.
Okay. Any questions?
Question, are we, at the time we removed the alcohol, you still had some events scheduled that were grandfathered in?
Correct.
Are those all gone?
They're all
at
done.
this point?
Yeah.
And just clarification on the code enforcement fee, we're foregoing a fee for an infraction? Is that the conversation?
No, the investigation or the site visit.
Right.
That fee. If there's an infraction or a citation, then there would be.
That would be the
essentially
$67.
No, that'd be a fine of,
It's about $1,000 for the
Okay.
nuisance violation type of thing.
Yes.
I don't know the history of this fee, but it looked like we just charged a fee at some point for code enforcement to go out and do an inspection or look at sites. And since our code enforcement will also do on-view activity as well as complaint-driven activity.
Right.
And we haven't charged that fee for the last 5 years that I'm aware of. It just makes more sense to not put that in there, because if you are charged with an allegation against the code, you're gonna get fines levied towards you anyways.
Understand.
You know, it looks to me like the history of that was typical of a re-inspection fee, I guess you could say. But it wouldn't be applicable to this type of code enforcement activity. It may be applicable to a planning activity, through building and planning, more than it would be applicable through code enforcement.
And, sorry, just so I have this completely straight. So then a code violation, the financial aspect of it, it's a sliding scale. It could be up to
Yep.
this much money, depending on the level of infraction then. There's
Depending on
not
the
a flat,
courts, it depends on the courts as well.
in all of the things that are involved in that.
Yes.
I understand.
yeah, I think that's typically a nuisance part of the code, not necessarily building code or something like that, building code.
Understand.
And everything we try to get voluntary compliance with anyway, so there's not an infraction, because that can tend to slow down the corrective action. If you place a fine or a fee on somebody, they most likely have scenario in their life or their property that leads to the issue that we're dealing with in essence up front. So if they're paying a fee or paying a fine, they might not have those resources to put into cleaning up or taking care of that infraction. So if we can put those resources to voluntary compliance, they can put those resources to fixing that. Hopefully we come to a quicker resolution, I guess, to that infraction.
Understand. Thank
I have a quick question for Mark. Didn't we raise the meeting rooms, especially the big room out here? Wasn't it from 50 to 75, right?
They have not been raised.
They have not been raised yet.
They have not been raised. That was proposed in
Okay. it
late
was
last year in the
proposed,
fee
okay.
schedule. So these are the same fees that we proposed at that time. We brought the fee schedule back, and
Okay.
it was pushed back to,
I was just
later
wondering
date,
if you've
yeah.
noticed any kind of a significant drop in
yeah,
rentals.
not at this point.
No,
We
okay.
may have seen a bit of a drop in the events that serve alcohol. And
Yeah,
it certainly
yeah.
is the case, but we haven't been able to track that associated with the fee, but we certainly will have some data once, if it's adopted, I should say.
And then the last portion are the miscellaneous fees managed by the police department, and I'll turn that over to Chief Moody.
So most of the fees surround animal control, and we've kept them status quo. We raised them a couple of years ago, and we didn't see a need to raise them at this point. So those are the adoption fees, rabies, et cetera, for the animal control portion. Where we will be making some changes, hopefully it's in your lines, is fingerprint fee cards, 128. So historically, we have used the hard fingerprint cards, the actual cards themselves rolling in ink. Those went bye-bye a long time ago, and we're one of the few agencies around that still rolls ink that way. We wrote a grant, and we'll be receiving what's called a live scan machine. It's an automated fingerprinting machine. with no ink, no hard paper. Basically, you roll it and send it where you want to send it. We did some evaluation of what it costs to do fingerprinting and the time it takes to fingerprint and the fees associated with the machine. An example is Tumwater. If somebody goes to the school district and wants to volunteer at the school district or be staff at the school district, they send them all the way to Tumwater to get fingerprinting and charge them $80 in Tumwater to get fingerprinting. So I had some conversations with the district, and what we've looked at is those are the closest area we could find. The sheriff's office doesn't do it on live scan. That's why they send them to Tumwater. So we looked at what it would cost, our staff time and et cetera, and we reasonably believe $60 would be fine for that.
Question on that, Chief?
Yes, sir.
Do you have to be a licensed fingerprint technician to be able to operate the machine, or can
No.
anybody operate it?
No.
And also, Councilmember Krantz has volunteered to be the first person to be fingerprinted with the new machine.
Why not?
So, be happy to be there for that.
We can even give him training on how to fingerprint himself. How's that?
Sounds great.
All right. So anyways, that's the live scan one. The taxi fee standard, basically it just balances out with the same fees for a taxi, because taxi cab driver's license, they have to come in annually and get fingerprinted for that as well. We noticed in going through all the fees that there wasn't a lot of, there's several areas of a lack of uniformity, where we were charging according to an RCW or something like that. Another part of the city would be charging according to a policy, so we agreed to uniformity in our fee schedule. So whatever you pay for a paper copy upstairs, you're gonna pay for a paper copy downstairs. So this just aligns all of that into one. And we did our research on that through WCIA as well as through WASPIC. And I think the only other change, other than standardizing, was a weapons permit fees. And that just changes per the state guidelines. We don't have a choice. When they up the concealed weapons permit fees, we have to up it. It's set through the state. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Question on the impound fees for dog.
Mm-hmm.
The first, second, and third, is that per year, per dog, or, over the history?
Annually.
It's annually.
It's
So
spelled out in there annually,
Okay.
yes.
So if they're, they
If
could
they're
get-
habitual, their dog gets out every month, then the cost will go up incrementally if we have to keep using staff time to track it down.
and as an offender of forgetting to renew my dog license,
You'll be the second person fingerprinted?
Boy, you're lying, man.
is there any easy way to send out reminders on that, or do you think that's cost effective, or?
That's something I'm sure we can explore. Jeff has talked about putting things into the utility bills. I'm sure that's something that can be, I can talk to Andy, we can do some online reminders. I'm more than happy to
If
put
it's
something together.
Only
Yeah.
if it's cost effective.
And it's a good point. It is a good point, because oftentimes the people that have had them in the past just forget to renew them annually. And whether that's us sending out billings annually, or whether that's putting something out in the news, absolutely, we'll look at that. And in fact, we'll make a house call to you, Mayor, if need be.
So one of the things that we're going to do eventually with those types of fees is to have an automated email system that will email you, kind of like your dentist does, which I don't necessarily like getting those from my dentist, but those types of things that we'll be able to implement to make it easier for both city staff and the residents, make sure they get things taken care of. And it's not just dog licenses or anything like that. It's several things that you have to do annually, like business licenses. Very, very similar method to be able to do that to make it easier for everybody.
Questions? Mine are easy.
I have a more general one on public records. Are those pretty much set by, are the rates we're using, are those the ones that are recommended by?
So there is I don't believe it's an RCW, but it is a Washington Administrative Code, if I'm not mistaken, that says Municipalities can charge up to a set amount. The state basically sets the amount unless you do a full-fledged study to determine what the rates would have to be for your specific municipality in order to do a cost recovery. In my view, and I'd be happy to discuss this, I think using the rates that are set by the state for those types of things lends to more uniformity, so people know what to expect when they walk in the door. And it would cost a significant amount of staff time for us to do a study in order to justify either a higher or potentially a lower rate. But the cost benefit just isn't worth it in my view. But be happy to discuss that with council if you have different way you'd like to go about it.
The way we arrived at it for the uniformity, there is a section of the RCW that discusses determining actual costs only after notice in public hearing, but then it goes on to explain that most of the agencies do not use that because it's, when you just put in there time and staff or time and materials, people really don't know what they're walking into until they get into it. So it recommends through the RCW that an agency do not calculate the actual costs if it has rules or regulations declaring the reasons for doing so would be unduly burdensome. So if we had to go through, like Jeff said, and calculate, okay, what's it cost us to have a staff person walk over to the copy machine, run a copy through there, what's it cost for the paper, that would be pretty burdensome on a city our size to be able to run a study of that nature. So then it outlines what the cost should be if you don't do that.
Thanks.
One other, go ahead, Eric.
I'd just like to go back to the no alcohol. The council didn't decide that decision, and I've been to many weddings here, you know, so we're now saying you can't have a champagne toast at your own wedding? I mean,
I think it was decided by the council.
no, it wasn't.
I recall it that we did decide that.
I believe we
decided
discussed
here.
it. I can't remember the exact nature of our decision, but I know it was discussed. I thought it was consensus or recommendation that we drop alcohol. That's my recollection.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't vote on it, so. But I wouldn't book a wedding here if I couldn't have a champagne toast.
I think that was one of our discussions, was it may limit, it was kind of the issue of if we could decide ahead of time who could have alcohol and
Exactly
who
right.
may not, but we can't do that.
Essentially, it's in our rental policy. It's not a policy that was set by the council. And it's all or nothing. So it's champagne toast or full-on kegger. You know, you can't really limit that. So, and the insurance is the same for somebody. Somebody'd have to go out and get their insurance, get their banquet permit, and go through those hoops, and which are added costs as well. And we were just seeing more and more wear and tear, more and more staff turnover. We were having trouble staffing this building. We pay minimum wage. They work till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, mopping up vomit. It's a tough prospect to fill those positions and operate this facility under those circumstances.
Mark and I had numerous discussions with prior city administrators and commission at the time about providing security as well. This building's an investment for the city, and to take care of that investment for the city from a public safety standpoint, I would say if you're gonna have alcohol at a facility like this, you require us to be there for security or a licensed bonded security company to do so. That gets cost prohibitive for many smaller folks, like a wedding or something like that, if they had to hire 2 officers.
Councilman Brown.
Well, yeah, and our conversation is, it wasn't the champagne toast that was causing the problem. It was people who have parties that it gets out of hand and things like that. And again, they do make a non-alcoholic champagne too. So I'd imagine that people could have a non-alcoholic champagne and not tell the bride and groom that it was non-alcoholic. And we could probably still get people that wanted to toast or do a symbol of a toast, and they not even know what you put in their glass. So I think I lean towards, listen, stop laughing. I lean towards agreeing with that this facility, the wear and tear, the care, that there are probably other wedding places, you know, so I don't know that we officially voted on it, but I would lean to where I think basically alcohol-free will save us a lot more time and money, so, but I do not remember if we really voted on that issue or not, but I support probably alcohol-free.
Okay. Anything else?
So that's all I had.
On that note, I have one item, in chief, I have no questions of the chief, so if you want to sit down.
Sit down. That's good. Sit down.
Not necessarily want to know if I want to debate this evening, but some questions that I kind of wrote down as I was reviewing through this. Forgive me on the history here, but why do we call out sexually oriented businesses in the business licensing category as a separate business type? I'm curious why that is that way, and why they wouldn't just be like, what is a sexually oriented business? I think I can guess, but according to our city code, it's not defined.
Right. So that is very typical for cities and counties to do that, because there are specific state regulations about where they can be cited. Distances from houses of worship, schools, those types of things. Takes a little bit more work on staff time in order to verify those things as part of the business license process. That they're located in a place where it's applicable. That's why they're called out a little bit differently. That is something that we will have to define in the city code, and that's one of the things that I've noted in my notes when we go through the code rewrite, starting later this year, that we will define those things in that instance probably fairly narrowly, but that's going to be up for council debate and discussion.
That is all.
Okay, that's what you're gonna end with?
I'm good.
All right.
So just generally, this work session on the master fee schedule, relatively short, not a whole lot of things in here. The two remaining work sessions that we have scheduled will go quite a bit more in depth to the various pieces and parts of the fee schedule, so the council can see how those are put together. We wanted to start off with this one to get you into that role of looking at these fees, and kind of introduce the topic to council. But the overall philosophy that we're proceeding with when we look at these fees is to simplify, and I think you can see it in some parts that we've done that. Make the dollar amounts, of course, even, like I said, to keep it simple. Anybody can calculate what their fees are going to be. And to reduce and simplify the entire process for not only city staff, but also for our customers. When they walk into the door, they know what to expect. And that's the direction we're proceeding with. I'd be happy to answer any questions or anything else that the council has.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Any questions for city manager? Hearing none, we'll adjourn the study session.